If somebody has a special talent and they work really hard at that talent and they excel, perhaps they're a sportsman or a comedian that makes millions of people laugh, or they invent some fantastic new product, or perhaps they start some business that brings great benefit to the community, then I don't think anyone really resents that person earning a great deal of money. What pisses people off is people that have done sweet FA for what they have. It's an objection to what is known as unearned wealth. And I think in the current raging debate about inequality, it's important to differentiate between the wealth that is earned and the wealth that is unearned. The Guardian columnist Owen Jones is coming in for a lot of flack at the moment because his earnings have propelled him into the so-called 1%, and being in that 1% is somehow seen as a betrayal of his socialist principles. I would defend Jones and say that he's earned his place in the 1% by writing books and articles that a lot of people want to read, and by going on telly and saying provocative things that a lot of people want to hear. If you're born with nothing, the only way you have of bridging that gap, of reaching the elite, of becoming part of that 1%, is by working. But if you're taxed on your work, if you pay income tax at 45%, while those who own assets go untaxed, it becomes even more difficult to bridge that gap. So I'm going to describe a system of taxation now that would result in unearned wealth being distributed while earned wealth is kept. It's called land value tax, LVT, and it's quite difficult to explain in a pithy way that people understand, and I think that's one of the reasons that no politician has ever really taken up its cause. It's based on the thinking of 19th century American economist Henry George, and he called it a single tax because it replaces all other taxes. You've heard of the mansion tax, and that derives from LVT, but the problem with the mansion tax is that it was come in addition to other taxes. As I say, LVT replaces all taxes, in its purest form at least. And the philosophy behind Georgism is that the wealth you create is yours. You do with it as you see fit. But the wealth that nature has given us, in particular the land, is unearned. No individual or company made the land. There is no cost of production to it. Nature gave it to us, and so it should belong to everyone. By building or farming or mining on it, you have improved it, but the land itself was always there. So LVT ignores the house, the farm, the mine, whatever is on the land, and tax is paid simply on the rental value of the land itself. Now, some land is more valuable than other land. It has a higher rental value, of course. But as it's the needs of the community that has pushed that land value up, the land value should go to the community, not to the individual. The 17th century proponents of LVT were called the physiocrats. Physiocracy meaning government of nature. And the unearned wealth given to us by nature, the mineral wealth, the airspace, the broadcast spectrums, they belong to the community. Why should the oil under the sands of Saudi Arabia go to a few princes? It is unearned wealth that should have been spread throughout the people. Now, of course, there are huge costs that go into finding and extracting minerals, just as building and flying a plane or transmitting through a broadcast network involves great expense and technological innovation. Such endeavours, if taken on successfully, are compensated commensurately by the reward of profit in the market. Profit that goes untaxed, remember. But if you want the right to exclude others from a plot of land, i.e. for it to be yours, and you want government to protect your title to that land, then a rent needs to be paid to the community that reflects the value of that land. And once you've paid that rent, the profits of your endeavours are yours. So here's a simple explanation of how LVT would work. Every parcel of land is assessed for its rental value, not the buildings or the crops or the drainage or anything else, just the land. If the land is undesirable scrubland in a remote location with no planning permission, it'll have a very low rental value. If it's in a prime area, it's very fertile or it's rich in minerals, demand for access to that land will be, or to those features, will be high, so the land's rental value will be high too. And valuations are based on current market evidence. And if there are two plots of land in the same street, both of the same size with the same planning permission, and yet one is developed and the other is not, they are both still given the same rental value. So a 4-bed family home in a pleasant part of London, say 2,000 square feet, might have an annual rental value of, say, I don't know, £35,000 a year. A similar property in an undesirable part of the country might go for, I don't know, £10,000 a year. The difference between the two, £25,000 per annum, gives you a rough idea of the premium that the London land commands, i.e. the land value of the London property. You would then pay a percentage of that land value of £25,000 in tax each year, and that is the only tax you would pay. What percentage? Well, that depends on how much government needs for its spending. And again, that depends on what your view of government spending should be. I believe in small government and individual responsibility, so I tend to argue in favour of low government spending. There are others, particularly on the left, who think government should spend more. That's fine. Total government spending last year was about 750 billion. To levy 750 billion in LVT, you would add up the rental value of all the 60 million acres of land in the UK. You then divide the annual rental value by the amount the government needs. If the total annual rental value of all the land in the UK is £7.5 trillion and the government needs 750 billion, then the rate of tax payable will be 10% of annual rental value. If the total rental value of all UK land is 1.5 trillion, then the rate of tax payable would be 50%. If a government is going to try and levy 50% LVT, then good luck to it trying to persuade its people to agree to that. That is one of the many beauties of LVT. It is direct and transparent. There is no concealment. The cost is felt directly by those that pay it, and a government spending too much will quickly find itself pressed by its electorate to stop doing so. In the UK at present, 50% of land is unregistered, according to Kevin Cahill in his book Who Owns Britain? 50%. A generation of people, now known as Generation Rent, cannot afford a house, yet there are over 600,000 properties that are sitting empty. Many companies are sitting on potential building plots and not developing them. Instead, they're waiting for the land value to appreciate. LVT will pressure existing landowners either to put the property to good use or to make way for someone who will. Inheritance tax has failed to redistribute the unearned wealth of the 70% of the land that is owned by 0.6% of the population. That is right, 0.6% of the population owns 70% of the land. If those lucky people, or companies or trusts who own this land want exclusive rights to it, then pay tax to the community. If they don't want to pay tax on it, sell the land to someone who is happy to. This is a quick, efficient way to redistribute this unearned wealth throughout the community via natural market forces, rather than by the incompetence and moral minefield that is state reallocation. And it's one that should appeal to the left, as it redistributes unearned wealth throughout society. At the same time, it should appeal to the right. Milton Friedman actually called it the least bad tax. It's also a simple tax to administer. Once the system is in place, revaluation of the land, which would probably take place annually, is the only issue. Not only is there less bureaucracy, there is very little evasion. You can't hide land or move it offshore. Speculation in real estate, often driven by loose monetary policy, is one of the biggest, if not the single biggest driver of the boom-bust cycle. While the unequal distribution of land is not only in the UK but globally, is probably the single biggest manifestation of the wealth gap. Now, the idea of the proceeds of LVT going into a central government pot may seem contradictory to some of the other minimal state views I go on about. What does government then do with its revenues from LVT? And this raises the question, what is the state for? Government should spend that money on whatever is deemed right at the time. It might be spent on infrastructure or road building. It might be spent on welfare or on the BBC. It might be spent on protecting people's property rights. Or it could even be returned to shareholders, the people, in the form of a dividend. Now that really would be socialism. Well, thank you very much for watching this blog. I hope you liked it. If you did, please sign up to my YouTube channel or to my blog. The links are below. And you might even be interested in my book, Life After the State, in which I talk a little bit more about LVT and also about all sorts of other things. You can buy that book on Amazon or at lifeafterthestate.com. Thank you very much for listening. Goodbye.